Welcome back. Now, Africa's push for greater influence in the UN Security Council and an overhaul of the global financial architecture are now part of an official framework for negotiations at the world stage. This is after UN member states adopted the Pact for the Future, which is a new framework to reform the United Nations and make it more effective. The pact was the outcome of the Summit of the Future that was held in New York. Eric Latif spoke with Guy Ryder, the UN Under-Secretary General and lead of the summit, to assess the significance of the new agreement.
World leaders meeting in New York have adopted the Global Pact of the Future, which aims to make the UN more effective. This is by what they say, reimagining the multilateral system and steering humanity on a new course to meet existing commitments. I'm joined now by Guy Ryder, who is the UN Under-Secretary General for Policy and the UN lead for the Summit of the Future, which is taking place in New York. Thank you for joining us, Under-Secretary General. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Now, this Pact of the Future comes with several other commitments. There's a Global Digital Compact and a Declaration on Future Generations. Briefly, can you just give us a summary of what these three are all about?
Yes, firstly, thank you for having me. I think the whole objective of the Summit for the Future, which concluded very successfully on Sunday, was to equip our multilateral system, the United Nations, to be more effective, more inclusive in dealing with the extraordinary and multiple global challenges that we face today. And you've mentioned the areas that we focused upon. How we govern technologies for the benefit of all to stimulate development. How we reform the international financial architecture to deliver development more effectively. How we take into account the voices and views of young people and future generations. But also looking at our own house, as it were, how we can reform our Security Council, how we can make our General Assembly work better, and particularly to reflect the world of today, of 2024, and not of 1945 when the United Nations was founded.
International peace and security. Very many conflicts taking place in Africa, and African countries, many of them feeling like the West and the entire international community abandons Africa when it's convenient or when other things are happening in other parts of the world. For example, the biggest humanitarian crisis right now is happening on the continent of Africa, but not much attention seems to be coming towards Africa.
There was a great deal of attention to the peace and security agenda in the Summit of the Future, and again, important decisions taken. I think the world is conscious that this summit took place against a background of terrible conflict in the world, and Africa, of course, is not absolved from these conflicts. A great deal of talk about that, but here is a challenge. We have to reform our Security Council to overcome the paralysis which seems to have afflicted it when it comes to making important decisions in respect of conflicts raging in the world.
The push to reform the UN Security Council is another one, where African countries want more permanent presence in the UN Security Council and veto power, or at least more power and presence in the UN Security Council. What's the route towards this?
Well, the decision taken at the Summit of the Future and contained in the Pact is described as the biggest breakthrough in Security Council reform since 1963. It's not the final answer, it's not the final decision, but you have a set of principles, and the first of those principles for reform is to correct the historic injustice against Africa. The fact that Africa has no permanent seat and presence in the Security Council. The forward road will be informed by the principle now adopted that Africa does need to have that permanent presence. So I think that there we've made a very concrete step forward. Not the end of the road, but very much in the right direction.
Are the big powers speaking the same language? Okay, there's a conversation about having a permanent presence of African nations at the Security Council, but do they have veto power?
The veto, of course, is another part of the reform package. And this is going to have to be worked out in the negotiating process. There is not precise language to be found in the Pact that would answer that precise question. But these are clearly issues that are very much on the table now, and they will have to be resolved by our member states in the months ahead.
And one of the aspects of the summit was the action days, where you had all the other actors coming together and raising their voice and putting their voice across. How were the voices incorporated in the final pact?
Well, let me say we've been involving civil society and other stakeholders from the very beginnings of the preparation of the summit and the pact. And foremost amongst that involvement was the civil society conference which took place in Nairobi in the month of May. I was there. It was a terrific conference. 70% of the 2,000 participants were from Africa, and it was really an example of the way that the voices of civil society have been heard all the way along the road. Of course, the decisions are finally made by member states, but those decisions were informed by civil society, by private sector speakers, by academia and the scientific community.
And yes, indeed, changes at the UN affect the result